No.
No taki
Such a desperate cry. What did the child do to anyone? He wasn't even a soldier. How the child wept and cried. He was led from the school, led to the bridge. And from the bridge they were shot, so they fell in the water. They had no mercy.
It was horrible. It was a horrible feeling. You can never forget it.
Captured German documents confirm that the Wittenmeyer unit of the 14th SS Division GALIZIEN entered the village of Nizhna Bocha that day. The documents say, the Ukrainian volunteers of the 14th SS Division engaged in the battle fought excellently.
No, a na koniec partizanów.
They didn't find any partisans in the end, and our men had to pay for it.
The Slovak uprising was recognized and aided by all of the Allies fighting Hitler. Britain, the United States and the Soviet Union all sent military missions and essential military supplies to aid the rebels. And Allied aircrew who had crash-landed or who had been shot down over Nazi-occupied Europe were airlifted out of the country. But like the partisans, the downed Allied airmen were also hunted by the German forces, including the Galicia Division.
I have had testimony of a number of veterans who encountered Allied flyers during the operations. Allied flyers were captured by the division or by divisional personnel. They were taken prisoner, they weren't maltreated by the Ukrainians, and they were passed to the military police unit attached to the division. Whether they were shot or not, I don't know.
I think it would be a mistake to make a blanket accusation against every man in the Galician division. I think many of those who entered its ranks when it was first raised were anti-Russian, anti-Bolshevik idealists. But as the division lost men in combat, replacements came from very different sources. Ukrainian collaborationist police units, guard units that have been guarding ghettos, labor camps. The Ukrainian division, by the end of the war, had become a rallying ground for all sorts of Ukrainian nationalists, fanatical pro-Nazis, as well as honest anti-Soviet fighters.
One of the collaborationist units which later joined the Galicia Division was the Ukrainian Self-Defense Legion. In 1968, Polish prosecutors began an investigation into the Ukrainian Self-Defense Legion and into one of its leading members, Teodor Duck. Duck was eventually sentenced to 25 years imprisonment for his activities with the Legion during the war.
I started an investigation to see what Duck had actually done. I proved beyond doubt that he had committed murders. He had murdered about 25 people or thereabouts. He murdered Ukrainians, he murdered Poles, he murdered his own acquaintances.
The Ukrainian Self-Defense Legion was recruited from Ukrainian nationalist partisans by members of the notorious SS murder squads, the Einsatzgruppen. In the summer of 1944, the unit was crossing the Lublin region of southern Poland when their commander, SS Captain Siegfried Asmus, was shot and killed.
As a result, after a short while, Asmus's deputy, Colonel Chichenko, decided to pacify the village of Kleniov.
One former member of the unit, Vasil Malashinsky, gave evidence to a post-war trial about the attack on the village.
It was like a kind of ecstasy. We burned, we shot, and we destroyed. I was shooting, and perhaps I set fire to things. I don't remember if I shot anybody. We didn't go into houses because they were already burning. I saw the bodies of men, women, and children. We didn't leave anybody alive.
"44 civilians, mainly old people and children, fell victim to the Legion in Klaniov that day. Some were just 3 years old. After the murders in Klaniov, Dak's unit went on to kill another 105 people in the village of Skalbmierz.
Partisan warfare, by its very nature, means that civilians can find themselves in an active role, as the Americans found out to their great cost in Vietnam.
They can also be innocent bystanders.
They can be innocent bystanders. Who's to say which they are in the heat of the moment?
Are there people from the Self-Defense Legion still in Britain today?
Yes. There are people from the Self-Defense Legion living in Britain today.
It is beyond dispute that it was involved in the pacification of Kleniov. It is beyond dispute that it was involved in the pacification of Skalbmierz. And it is in no doubt whatsoever that the Ukrainian Self-Defense Legion took part in suppressing the Warsaw Uprising. This is obvious, beyond any dispute.
Leichte Flak beschießt ein Beobachtungsnest auf einem Turm.
It was a ferocious, merciless conflict. Warsaw was pretty much razed to the ground. It was one of the most barbaric moments of the Second World War. Surviving members of the division who came to Britain, who settled here, always strenuously denied that any of the members of the unit had had any involvement in the suppression of the Warsaw Uprising. If there is evidence of that, it completely shatters the story that they have perpetuated.
This unit roster of the Ukrainian Self-Defense Legion confirms that they saw action fighting for the Germans in Warsaw. 3 months later, Theodor Dak and the Self-Defense Legion joined the SS Division GALIZIEN. In 1945, they surrendered to the British Army in Austria. In the last days of the war, the British Army was pushing into Austria, where they discovered thousands of Ukrainians in German military uniforms.
We had the shambles of various nationalities. We were tired. We wanted to get rid of the buggers, you see, and go home.
In 1945, Dennis Hills was a major in the British Army.
The job of the army was to clear the place, get rid of the rubbish.
They simply gave these men marching orders. They said, head southwards towards Italy and someone will take care of you when you arrive. And that's exactly what the division did. They just trundled off south towards Italy.
Ukrainians were put into a camp at Rimini. There were escapes. In fact, the guarding was very poor in those days. The SS used to run away. It was slack.
Under the agreement reached with the Soviet Union at Yalta, the British were committed to sending back all Soviet citizens captured in German army uniform or who had served the Third Reich in any capacity.
But the problem was in determining precisely where the men came from. If they were from eastern Ukraine, which before the war had been under Soviet rule, they were liable to be deported. But if they came from western Ukraine, which before the war had been under Polish rule, they were not liable to be sent back.
My job was to find out more or less who the hell they were. I found a lot came from Soviet Ukraine. When I made my report, I made it clear that these fellows should be given the benefit of the doubt. They should not be repatriated.
In the summer of 1945, the Red Army sent a screening team to Rimini.
I remember 4 or 5 officers had an interpreter, screening soldiers who refused to participate. They were there to check on the Ukrainians and to try to persuade us so that they could be sent back to Russia. They couldn't even get into conversation with these fellows. They were simply dumb insolents, you know. The question of war criminals did arise, and the Soviet military mission did give us a few names. And these names were handed in to one of our captains, and I think he looked at them and threw them in a wastepaper basket. Propaganda. You can't believe all this rotten nonsense.
But 2 years later, the British decided to check for themselves if there were war criminals in the camp. They sent a screening mission led by Brigadier Fitzroy MacLean.
It became quite clear to me that this was a hopeless proposition. We were not qualified to screen Ukrainians. We didn't have the necessary language experts or anything like that.
It was very difficult for MacLean, in the absence of any personal documentation, army paybooks, etc., to work out just who these men were, where they'd come from, what units they'd served with. He basically had to accept whatever it was that they told him.
The Ukrainians told MacLean that the division had only been formed in September 1944 and had been occupied with training and guard duties. They told him that they did not commit a single crime during the entire war.
He made it quite clear to Whitehall that his report was not watertight, and he had suspicions about them.
I think it was fairly clear that quite a number of them must have been in the SS as part of a Ukrainian SS division. So there was every probability that there were war criminals amongst them.
MacLean was very honest. He said he didn't have the time or the resources to do a thorough screening, and he thought they should be screened later on, which meant being screened in England.
Did that happen?
No.
In London, civil servants were divided. Eventually, it was the Prime Minister Clement Attlee who decided to let all 8,000 men of the Ukrainian SS division into Britain.
It was unprecedented for such a large number of men to be brought into the United Kingdom without going through any of the normal channels. The news leaked out that a division of Ukrainian soldiers who fought for the Germans was arriving in England. Questions were asked in Parliament that men who'd been involved in war crimes were now being housed in camps in Britain without apparently having been